They thought it was just a bad dream. At exactly 2:17 a.m., in a quiet Louisville suburb, the Morgan family's world was ripped open by the guttural, bone-deep growl of a dog they had nearly left behind at a shelter. The house was still, except for that sound low, ragged, like something ancient clawing up from the dark. Then came the frantic bark, not once, not twice, but a series of sharp feral bursts that echoed down the hallway like gunshots. A warning, a threat, a plea. Bruno, their blind German shepherd, wasn't just barking. He was charging straight into the nursery. Rachel Morgan sat bolt upright in bed, instinct already pulling her toward the crib where her newborn daughter Sophie was asleep. But before she could swing her legs over the side, Bruno's claws scraped hard against the nursery floor and a heavy thud followed. Michael was already stumbling into the hallway barefoot and groggy. Bruno, what the hell are you doing? Inside the nursery, the dog had launched himself toward the crib, but not at Sophie. His massive frame slammed into the wall just inches behind it. Wallpaper tore, wood cracked, and the sound of claws ripping into plaster filled the room like static. Michael grabbed for Bruno's collar, his voice rising with panic. He's lost his damn mind. Get him out of here. But Bruno wouldn't stop. His claws were bleeding now, smearing red across the floral wallpaper Rachel had picked out during her third trimester. And then they heard it, a faint sound so out of place, so wrong, a low vibrating hum. Not from the dog, from the wall. The Morgans had tried for years to have a child. Failed IVF, miscarriages, hormones, heartache. The kind of loss that builds silently in a marriage like mold behind a wall. And then Sophie came, tiny, healthy, fierce in the way only newborns can be. They found the house a month before Rachel gave birth. A 1950s blue clapboard fixer-upper with sagging gutters, a creaky porch swing, and a massive oak tree in the front yard. It was all they could afford with their savings drained and a baby on the way. Bruno came later. Or more truthfully, Bruno was pushed into their lives. Rachel had met him at the Jefferson County Animal Shelter while dropping off blankets from a baby shower. The big German shepherd was sitting quietly in the corner kennel, his eyes cloudy white head tilted toward every sound. The shelter worker said, "That's Bruno. He's blind, but different, real different." Rachel had squatted beside the kennel. What's his story? Used to be a service dog. Saved a dozen kids from a fire. Lost his sight. Nobody wants him now. When Michael saw the dog, he said exactly what Rachel knew he would. We're about to bring in a newborn home, and you want to adopt a blind, traumatized dog. Seriously, Rachel had stared back, fire in her voice. He didn't turn his back on those kids. I'm not turning my back on him. Michael had given in. Eventually, begrudgingly, and Bruno came home. He adapted like he'd lived there his whole life. Within days, Bruno knew every inch of the house, how many steps to the kitchen, where the sofa leg was, which floorboards squeaked near the fridge. He found his water bowl without help, waited quietly at the door when Rachel had contractions and followed her from room to room like a furry, silent guardian. Still, Michael remained cautious. He's a good dog, he admitted once, but he's still blind. And Sophie's still fragile. When they finally brought Sophie home, it was early April. The dogwood trees along Sycamore Avenue had exploded with white blossoms and the house smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Rachel had introduced the baby carefully. Bruno, she'd said, kneeling beside him with Sophie bundled in her arms. This is Sophie. She's ours. She's family. Bruno had tilted his head. He stepped forward exactly 6 inches and stopped. No barking, no sniffing, just stillness. And then he backed away and curled up in his bed. Michael had watched the whole thing with silent surprise. Well, he muttered, at least he's not licking her face. The first nights were a blur of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and bleary-eyed pacing. Sophie cried in small, fierce gasps. Bruno never moved from his post outside their bedroom, ears twitching, head tilted, listening. On the third night, they moved Sophie to her nursery, a soft yellow room with gray elephant curtains Rachel had sewn herself. The crib was vintage. Michael had sanded it down and refinished every rail. Are we sure about this? Michael had asked, hovering. The monitor's on. We'll hear everything, Rachel had replied. Bruno had followed them into the nursery, did one slow circle around the crib, and laid down by the door. Good boy, Rachel had whispered. They left the room. The monitor buzzed softly. The night was quiet. Until it wasn't. If you're just as amazed by the hidden senses of heroic animals like Bruno, make sure to hit that subscribe button on Heroes for Animals. We share real-life stories of dogs who protect, heal, and save often when no one else can. New stories weekly. Subscribe now and don't miss the next life-saving moment. Rachel couldn't explain what made her jolt awake that night. Sophie had just fed. The baby was asleep. Michael was snoring, but Bruno was standing, his entire body stiff, his head turned toward the nursery. Rachel sat up. Bruno, what is it, buddy? He didn't look at her, just gave a low, chest-deep growl. Then with silent purpose, he walked to the nursery door. Rachel followed. What's wrong? Bruno pressed his nose to the crack in the door, then started scratching. His claws clicked against the paint, then harder, more urgent, barking now, sharp and fast. Michael stumbled in behind them. What is wrong with him? He's trying to tell us something, Rachel said. He's never done this before. Michael grabbed for the dog's collar again. Bruno twisted free. Then he did something none of them expected. He lunged at Rachel's nightgown, not biting, just tugging, pulling her toward the nursery. Okay, I'm coming, she said. Bruno let go and charged the nursery door. Crack! The door splintered inward under his weight. Inside, the baby was still asleep. The nightlight glowed softly. The crib was untouched. But Bruno wasn't focused on Sophie. He was focused on the wall behind the crib. He was attacking it, claws scraping, growling, tearing the wallpaper down in long strips, snarling with pure desperation. And then underneath it all, they heard it. The buzzing. Low, faint, insistent. Like something alive and waiting. Rachel's breath caught. Michael, do you hear that? Michael was already at the wall, frozen. The sound was coming from inside it. Buzzing, humming, growing louder. Get Sophie out of here, he said. Rachel didn't argue. She scooped up their daughter and clutched her tight. Bruno's paws were bleeding. The wallpaper was stained with streaks of red, but he didn't stop. Couldn't. He'd sensed something none of them could see. He'd protected the one thing that mattered most. And for the first time, Michael believed it. Wholeheartedly. Rachel didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until the cold air in the hallway hit her lungs like ice. She clutched Sophie tighter, the baby still sleeping in the crook of her arms, tiny fist balled against her chest. In the nursery behind her, chaos, unraveled wood, splintering wallpaper, shredding, and her blind German shepherd bleeding at the paws as he fought something invisible inside the wall. Michael stood frozen for a beat, one hand on the crib, the other gripping a flashlight he'd yanked from the closet. Bruno wasn't stopping. His claws scraped deeper, blood now seeping across the plaster. Then came the sound again. The unmistakable buzzing. Not like a single fly or a bee caught in a light fixture, but an angry layered vibration, deep and growing. Michael's voice was hushed. Is that bees? Rachel nodded, heart pounding. It sounds like a swarm. Michael knelt near the torn wall, flashlight in hand, and gently pushed Bruno aside. Easy, buddy. We got it now. Bruno backed up, panting heavily, but his ears were still trained forward, body trembling with tension. He wasn't done. Michael peeled back more wallpaper. Behind it, the drywall had cracked, bowing slightly outward. As he leaned closer, a small chip flaked off and something black shifted inside. He jumped back. Oh my God. What? What is it? Rachel asked, rocking Sophie, now fully awake and fussing. Michael didn't answer right away. He reached for his phone and called 911. 10 minutes later, red and white lights flashed across their living room windows. Firefighters in full gear filed through their front door while Sophie wailed from the safety of Rachel's arms. Bruno stood guard beside her, body still quivering. One of the firefighters, a stocky man with soot-streaked cheeks and a southern drawl, took a long look at the nursery wall. You've got a full hive in there, he said. And not just any bees, these are Africanized. Rachel frowned. You mean killer bees? He nodded. Exactly that. Highly aggressive. They attack in swarms and don't stop until the threat's gone. A few stings. You're in the ER. A baby like yours. He shook his head slowly. Wouldn't have made it. Rachel's knees gave out and she sank onto the hallway floor, Sophie cradled in her arms. He knew, she whispered. Bruno knew. The firefighter looked at the dog, his bloodied paws still dripping, and gave a slow, respectful nod. Damn right he did. Back in the shelter when they first met, Bruno, the volunteer, had said something strange, something Rachel hadn't fully processed until now. His hearing is off the charts, the woman had whispered. It's like he can hear things before they happen. Rachel had written it off as shelter small talk, the kind of thing you say to help a hard-to-place dog get adopted. But now it didn't sound like nonsense. It sounded like a gift. The next few hours blurred into a surreal string of images. Emergency crews tearing open the wall, pulling out honeycomb the size of basketballs, hundreds, maybe thousands of bees trapped behind the thin drywall ready to burst through. A local beekeeper arrived in a suit and hood and said he'd never seen anything like it in a residential home. Michael stood by holding Sophie as Rachel helped the vet tech wrap Bruno's paws in clean gauze. The shepherd was quiet, stoic, eyes cloudy but head alert. He saved her life, Michael said more to himself than anyone else. He really did. Rachel wiped away tears as she stroked Bruno's fur. And we almost threw him out for barking. By the time the team finished clearing the hive, it was nearly dawn. The nursery was wrecked, shredded wallpaper, blood-stained carpet, half a wall ripped down to the studs. But it was quiet, safe. Michael helped the last firefighter carry out a bucket full of comb and broken plaster. "I gotta ask," the man said as they reached the front door. "What's that dog's name?" Bruno, Michael said. The firefighter blinked. "Wait, Bruno? As in the one from the Pine Hill Orphanage fire, the service dog that pulled out all those kids." Michael turned stunned. "You know about that?" "Hell yeah," the man grinned. "That story's taught in our academy. That dog's a legend." He looked past Michael at the battered German shepherd resting near Rachel's feet. Looks like he's still in the hero business. Later that morning, with Bruno resting on a pile of towels and Sophie finally napping, Rachel did something she hadn't done since they brought the dog home. She pulled up Google and typed "Bruno Service Dog Fire, Kentucky." The search returned a half-dozen articles. She clicked one. "Blind hero dog saves 12 kids from fire, loses his sight but not spirit." She scrolled through the pictures, a younger Bruno, then called Rangers standing beside a man in a firefighter uniform. The article told of a blaze that tore through a children's home late one night. Ranger had alerted his handler, led children through smoke-filled corridors, and returned to the fire multiple times. He was credited with saving every child inside. His handler, Captain David Reeves, didn't make it. He died of complications from smoke inhalation a week later. Ranger, now Bruno, had waited outside the ICU for 3 days after his death. Rachel wiped her eyes. No wonder no one adopted him. He's not just blind, he's been through hell. Just after lunch, a silver-haired woman appeared at their door with a plate of cookies and an anxious face. "Hi, I'm Martha. I live across the street. I heard the sirens last night and saw all the flashing lights. Is everything okay?" Michael explained as best he could. Martha listened, nodding. When she spotted Bruno, she stepped forward and said gently, "That dog's got the sight." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "He's blind." "Not that kind of sight, honey," Martha said with a kind smile. "The old folks used to call it the knowing. Some animals just sense things. My grandma's dog once dragged her out of bed and into the cellar the night before a tornado hit. Saved her life." She leaned down and touched Bruno's head gently. "You're one of the good ones, aren't you, boy?" Bruno's tail gave a slow, exhausted wag. That night, the Morgans didn't return to their bedroom. Instead, they made a makeshift camp in the living room, an air mattress, the pack and play, and Bruno curled up nearby, ears twitching with every creak of the floor. Rachel lay awake, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above them. "What if he hadn't barked?" she whispered. Michael didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I don't even want to think about it." Rachel reached out and found Bruno's paw. He shifted slightly, pressing against her palm. "We owe him everything." At 3 a.m., Sophie cried. Rachel sat up and unbuckled her from the carrier beside the bedroll. As she settled in to nurse, she noticed Bruno rise. He sniffed the air, ears forward, tail stiff. "What is it?" she asked. He moved to the window and gave one soft growl, then another. The air outside had changed. Clouds were rolling in, low and dark. Storm coming. But Bruno wasn't worried about thunder. His nose was pointing toward the ceiling. Rachel frowned. "What are you hearing now?" she whispered. Because it was just faint, just barely there, but it was unmistakable. The buzzing. Again. "Somewhere upstairs," Bruno growled, this time louder. Rachel didn't hesitate. She called for Michael, cradled Sophie close, and followed Bruno toward the stairs. Whatever was waiting, they trusted him now. Completely. The second time it happened, there was no barking. Only a deep, haunting growl. Bruno stood at the foot of the stairs, unmoving, his head raised toward the ceiling as thunder rolled in the distance. Rachel paused in the hallway, one hand on Sophie's chest as the baby squirmed in her carrier. The air in the house felt strange, heavier, warmer. And upstairs, almost hidden beneath the thunder, came a sound that made Rachel's stomach twist into a knot. Buzzing. Again. Michael flicked on the flashlight, the power already flickering from the approaching storm. "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. Bruno gave another growl deeper this time and began limping toward the stairs, his paws still wrapped in fresh gauze from the night before. He stopped at the base and turned as if asking permission. Michael nodded. Let's check it out, together. The family crept upstairs with Bruno leading. The hallway was dark, the overhead light dead. When they reached the master bedroom, Bruno paused at the door. His nose twitched, and he gave a short bark. Michael raised the flashlight and swept it across the room. Everything looked normal until they reached the far wall, the one that shared a boundary with the nursery. There beneath the baseboard was the faintest crack, and from that crack came movement, a single dark shape buzzing, zigzagging in the beam of light. Another bee, then two, then five. We need to get out of this house, Rachel said, clutching Sophie tighter. Michael nodded. Downstairs, now. Bruno stood, frozen ears alert, blocking the bedroom doorway as the buzzing behind the wall grew louder. His body trembled with tension, but he wouldn't move until they did. Rachel backed towards the hallway, then turned and rushed for the stairs. Bruno followed close behind, limping heavily, leaving faint smudges of blood from his wounded paws on the hardwood. The rain had started hammering the roof like a warning. They reached the basement just as the power finally cut out for good. The hum of the fridge died. The lights vanished. Only silence, broken by thunder and bees. The basement was their safest bet. Concrete walls, only one small window, and a door that locked. Michael flicked on their battery lanterns while Rachel laid out blankets for Sophie in the corner. Bruno took position at the foot of the stairs again, ears twitching, body low to the ground like a soldier at attention. I can't believe there's a second hive, Rachel whispered. We just had the whole house inspected. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Maybe the first one masked the second. Or maybe it was smaller, newer. Doesn't matter, she said. It's happening now. A gust of wind slammed something outside, then a loud, sharp crack, followed by a boom that shook the entire basement and knocked a flashlight off the shelf. Michael's face paled. That was the oak tree. Rachel looked up instinctively as though she could see through the concrete ceiling. It came down. He nodded. On the house. Sophie stirred and began to cry. Rachel soothed her as best she could, but the tension in the room was suffocating. They were trapped in their own home. Michael glanced at the ceiling again. If that tree hit the nursery or kitchen. Before he could finish the sentence, Bruno leapt to his feet, ears forward, and bolted up the stairs. Bruno, Rachel yelled. No! He didn't stop. Michael reached for his flashlight. I'll go after him. I'll grab the diaper bag while I'm up there. We left it by the front door. Rachel protested, but he was already halfway up the steps. The minutes that followed were the longest of Rachel's life. She sat on the cold basement floor, holding Sophie close as the baby whimpered against her chest. The storm outside raged, howling wind slicing through the cracks in the window. Rain pounded against the glass. The occasional groan of the house above made her heart stop. Bruno was still up there. So was Michael. She imagined the worst, falling debris, swarming bees, another hive bursting from the wall. Had they underestimated how bad things really were? Then footsteps. Fast, human. Michael returned, soaking wet and panting, diaper bag in hand. I found it, but... He hesitated. Bruno didn't come back with me. He kept trying to lead me toward the back of the house. Rachel's eyes widened. Why? I don't know, Michael said, but it was like he was hurting me, trying to take me somewhere. Thunder shook the walls again. A beam above them groaned loudly. And then scratching. From the top of the basement stairs. Bruno. Rachel rushed to open the door. There he stood, dripping wet bandages, muddy eyes cloudy but focused. He gave a short bark, then turned and padded back up a few steps, then stopped and looked back. He wants us to follow him, Rachel whispered. No, Michael said. It's not safe. I trust him, she said. After everything we follow. Bruno didn't lead them back to the nursery or the kitchen or the living room. He led them down a narrow back corridor off the basement. They'd never really explored a passageway cluttered with unopened boxes from their move-old tools and dust-covered furniture. At the end of the hallway stood a heavy metal door. Rachel stared. Is that a storm cellar? Michael said, shocked. I remember the inspector mentioning it when we bought the place. Said it was sealed, hadn't been opened in decades. Bruno scratched at the door, whining softly. Rachel looked at Michael. Open it. It creaked like an old gate. A rush of cool air escaped, carrying the scent of fresh concrete and dry steel. They stepped into the darkness, flashlights leading the way. The space was bigger than expected. The shelter had been built decades ago, probably during the Cold War, but someone had updated it more recently. Reinforced walls, emergency lights powered by batteries, shelves of supplies, water jugs, a manual air filtration system, even a small chemical toilet hidden behind a curtain. Rachel stood in awe. It's like a survival bunker. Michael ran his hand over the ventilation system. These filters, they're designed to block contaminants, including airborne particles. Rachel's eyes widened. Bee venom, he nodded slowly. In theory, yes. Bruno limped to the far side of the room and collapsed onto a rug, his body finally relaxing for the first time in days. He brought us here, Rachel said, voice trembling. The safest place in the entire house. The one we didn't even know we had. They settled in. Lanterns glowed against the walls, and the roar of the storm above was muffled by a thick concrete. Sophie slept on a folded towel. Bruno dozed beside her. Michael found an old battery-powered radio and tuned it to the local emergency broadcast. The news confirmed their fears. Widespread power outages, roads flooded, fire departments overwhelmed. Stay indoors, avoid travel. Do not approach hives or wild insects. Africanized bee activity reported across 3 counties. Rachel leaned back against the wall, heart racing. They were stuck, but they were safe, thanks to a blind, battered dog with nothing to prove and everything to give. She knelt beside Bruno, checking his paws. The stings were swollen. His breathing was ragged, but his tail thumped once when she touched his head. "You're hurt," she whispered. He pressed into her hand. "You knew. You always knew." Michael returned from checking the supplies. "We've got water, a first aid kit, enough food for 2 days. Radio's still working. As far as storm shelters go, this one's better than anything I've seen." Rachel nodded, unable to look away from Bruno. "He's not just smart," she said. "He's something else." Michael sat beside her, watching their daughter sleep. "You remember that recording we found? The old shelter volunteer said Bruno once alerted a family to faulty wiring behind their walls." Rachel nodded. "Well, guess what? The pest inspector told me when he came yesterday," Michael said. "The spot behind the nursery, the one where the hive was, it also had dangerous wiring. The insulation was melting." Rachel's breath caught. "It could have caused a fire," Michael continued. "Soon, real soon." She looked down at Bruno, her voice cracking. "He didn't just save Sophie from bees," she whispered. "He saved her from everything." The storm outside howled on, but inside the Morgans huddled together, safe, protected, and for the first time in days, completely still. Because Bruno was watching, and Bruno never gave up. The sun rose quietly over Sycamore Avenue, casting long streaks of light across broken branches and puddles that mirrored the sky. After the chaos of the storm, everything looked eerily peaceful except for the Morgans' house. Where the oak tree once stood tall and proud in the front yard, there was now a giant splintered stump. Its massive trunk had fallen through the roof, crashing into the dining room and part of the hallway. From the curb, the house looked like it had survived a war. But inside the storm shelter, beneath all the wreckage and ruin, Rachel, Michael, Sophie, and Bruno were still safe. And for now, that was all that mattered. It wasn't until mid-morning that the emergency crews began knocking. A fire marshal, a pest control inspector, a local electrician, and finally a quiet man in a sheriff's department windbreaker. Michael stepped outside, his boots crunching over wet debris, Sophie bundled in a blanket against his chest. The Sheriff Deputy Reynolds had come with news. "I just spoke with the team that pulled the rest of the hive from your upstairs wall," he said. "They found signs of heat damage behind the plaster, amateur wiring running too close to insulation." Michael's face tightened. "Are you saying your house was close to catching fire?" the deputy confirmed. "Real close. A few more days of warm weather, and we might have had a different kind of emergency on our hands." Rachel stepped out behind them, stunned. "So you're saying the bees weren't the only threat?" "No, ma'am," the deputy said gently. "You had 2 disasters waiting to happen. And from what I hear, that dog of yours picked up on both of them before any of us did." Bruno, resting on the porch just behind Rachel, perked up at the mention of his name. The deputy gave a soft smile. "He's got a gift, doesn't he?" That afternoon, the Morgans relocated across the street to Martha's house. Their neighbor had insisted firmly that they take the spare bedroom and the baby crib her granddaughter used to sleep in. She cooked them scrambled eggs, poured hot coffee, and fussed over Bruno like a beloved relative. "This dog," she said, running her fingers gently over his graying muzzle, "has more sense than most people I know." Rachel watched Bruno closely as he rested on Martha's porch. He was tired, yes. His body-battered paws wrapped in fresh bandages, and his breathing still heavier than usual. But he was alert, watchful, present, just like always. It was late afternoon when the blue sedan pulled into Martha's driveway. Rachel saw at first a clean, newer model Kentucky plates driven by a woman with dark shoulder-length hair and a guarded look in her eyes. She didn't get out right away, just sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring at the porch. Then finally she opened the door and walked up the path. "Excuse me," she called, her voice tight but polite. "I'm looking for the Morgans. The fire station said I might find them here." Michael stepped forward. "That's us. I'm Michael Morgan." Her eyes dropped not to him, but to Bruno, who had slowly risen to his feet. He tilted his head, sniffed the air, and stood completely still. "My name is Angela Reeves," the woman said. I believe that's my husband's dog." The air shifted. Rachel stepped onto the porch, Sophie asleep in her arms. "Your husband's Captain David Reeves," Angela said softly. "He was a firefighter. He passed away 2 years ago. That dog, he was his partner. His name was Ranger." Michael swallowed hard. "He's called Bruno now." Angela's eyes didn't leave the German Shepherd. "I called the shelter months ago. They said he'd finally been adopted, but they wouldn't tell me who." Rachel tightened her grip on Sophie. "Why are you here?" Angela's voice cracked. "Because I need to see him one last time. I think I made a mistake when I let him go." They sat together in Martha's living room, the weight of old pain and fresh miracles pressing down on everyone in the room. Bruno lay between them on the rug, his head resting near Sophie's tiny feet as she slept in the portable crib. Angela sat rigid in an armchair, hands clasped in her lap. "I wasn't in a good place after David died," she said. "He passed away a week after that orphanage fire. Smoke inhalation. I was broken. Couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep." She glanced at Bruno, or Ranger as she had known him. "I couldn't keep him. The apartment didn't allow dogs, and even if they had, I wasn't capable of caring for anyone." Rachel said nothing, but her eyes were soft. "I visited him for a while at the shelter," Angela went on, "every week. But then my mom got sick and I had to move to Louisville. I thought I'd come back for him. I thought I had time." Michael's jaw tightened. "He waited a long time." Angela nodded. "I know." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "This was in David's locker at the station. His captain gave it to me after the funeral." She pressed play. A warm, gravelly voice, calm, confident, filled the room. "Hey, babe, it's me. Just finished the school demo. Ranger did amazing. You should have seen the kids light up when he walked in, even the nonverbal ones. There's something about him. He just senses what people need." There was a long pause. Then, "I know we talked about having kids. I know you're worried, but I want you to know something. Ranger's got a gift. He's not just trained, he's connected. I added something to my will today. If something ever happens to me, and I hope it doesn't, I want him to go to a family with a child. One who really needs him. That's where he belongs." The recording clicked off. Angela's hands trembled as she set the device on the coffee table. Rachel had tears in her eyes. Michael looked at Bruno, who was now sitting upright beside the crib, tail gently wagging. "I didn't come to take him away," Angela said at last. "I thought I did. But after seeing her, she nodded towards Sophie, I realize David was right." She looked down at the floor. "He's not mine anymore. He belongs here." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light across Martha's porch, Rachel sat beside Bruno, gently brushing the fur behind his ears. Angela stood nearby, watching silently as Sophie reached for the dog's nose, giggling, when his cool snout touched her fingers. Michael brought out a tray of lemonade and handed Angela a glass. "He was your husband's dog," he said. "But now he's our hero." Angela smiled through tears. "He's exactly where David wanted him to be." A moment passed. Then Rachel whispered, "Sometimes, I think God doesn't send angels, he sends dogs." And for the first time since the fire, since the shelter, since the long broken wait, Bruno sighed and closed his eyes in peace. Because his work wasn't done, but his purpose had finally been fulfilled. By the following week, Bruno had become a local legend. The story of the blind German Shepherd, who saved baby Sophie not once, not twice, but 3 separate times, had made its way to the front page of the Lexington Herald-Leader, was picked up by 2 local TV stations, and even got a short feature on the regional NPR affiliate. The headline read, "He couldn't see, but he saved her life 3 times." Michael kept a paper copy folded neatly on the kitchen counter of Martha's house. He read it every morning over coffee like a ritual. 1 part disbelief, 1 part pride, 1 part silent gratitude. But Bruno didn't seem interested in any of the attention. Even with fresh bandages on his healing paws and the ache of age setting deeper into his joints, he followed Rachel and Sophie from room to room like it was the only job that mattered. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just watched, listened, and moved when they moved. Rachel sometimes caught herself talking to him like a person, and in some strange, beautiful way, it always felt like he understood. By the second week of April, the city scheduled a special event, the Lexington Animal Heroism Award, the first of its kind to be presented to Bruno at the county courthouse steps. The mayor would attend, so would the fire chief and a few of the EMTs who'd help clear the hive. Rachel didn't know how she felt about it. She wasn't one for big speeches or cameras, but she knew Bruno deserved it. What none of them knew, what none of them could have expected, was that Bruno still had one more threat to reveal, one more silent alarm to raise, and this time it wouldn't be buzzing or smoke. It would be something much quieter, something hiding in plain sight. It started with a man named Hector, a pest control specialist with over 40 years in the business. He'd been recommended by Rick Michaels' firefighter buddy and had come out to do a full secondary inspection on the Morgan's damaged house before restoration could begin. Hector wasn't the chatty type, but he was thorough. He spent nearly 6 hours combing through the attic crawl spaces in the basement. He had a thermal imaging camera, a moisture meter, and a small robot that could snake through tight ductwork. But the weirdest moment came after lunch when Bruno, freshly bandaged and moving slower than usual, decided to follow Hector around the property. "He's not bothering you, is he?" Michael asked. Hector looked over his shoulder. "Nope. Kind of feels like he's checking my work." He wasn't wrong. Bruno was sniffing, pausing, then moving again, sometimes staring at a particular spot, tail low, ears forward. Rachel noticed it too. He paused longest near the back of the garage wall, where an old panel had once been used for the home's original electrical wiring, the same wall that backed up against Sophie's temporary nursery. "He's doing it again," Rachel said quietly. Hector eventually called them over late that afternoon. He looked pale. "I didn't want to alarm y'all until I was sure," he said, "but there's something real dangerous in your walls." Rachel's stomach dropped. "Another hive." "No," he said, "worse." He showed them the thermal scan. Heat pockets, several of them. Unnaturally hot sections along the eastern wall, all radiating from amateur wiring installed decades ago. Someone had bypassed the grounding, leaving the system vulnerable to overheating and short circuits. "This isn't just bad wiring," Hector said. "This is a fire hazard waiting to happen. And with your insulation soaked from the storm, the risk is even higher." Michael stared at the image in silence. "How long?" "A few days, a week max, one spark, and the whole wall goes up." Rachel felt dizzy. This was the third disaster Bruno had sensed before it happened. That night, after Sophie went down, Rachel sat with Bruno on Martha's porch, the warm breeze stirring the spring air. Bruno lay beside her, his head resting gently against her leg. "You knew," she whispered. "You always do." He gave a soft exhale and she scratched behind his ears. It was eerie how all the pieces had come together. First the hive, then the storm. Now faulty wiring. 3 deadly threats, all hidden in the walls of a perfectly ordinary house. And each one somehow detected by a dog who couldn't even see. The next morning, Rick stopped by with a crew to begin repairs. He brought news. "I just got off the phone with the fire marshal," he told Michael. "They reviewed the original inspection from before you bought the place. That wiring. It should have been flagged. It was listed as non-functional, but no one ever verified that." Michael's face darkened. "You mean the inspector cut corners?" Rick nodded. "We're opening a formal complaint." Michael looked across the street at Martha's home at Sophie playing on a blanket with Rachel and Bruno. "I don't care about the lawsuit," he said. "We're just lucky." Rick glanced at the dog. "No, you're not lucky. You're protected." Later that day, the doorbell rang again. Rachel opened it to find a delivery man with a padded envelope and a clipboard. "It's from Frankfurt," he said. "State office." She signed it and opened it carefully. Inside was a certificate embossed with gold trim and a formal letter from the governor's office. Bruno had been named Honorary K9 First Responder of Kentucky. It was a title reserved for working dogs who had demonstrated life-saving behavior in the line of duty. And Bruno, despite his blindness, despite his age, had done more in a week than most dogs do in a lifetime. Rachel showed Michael, tears welling in her eyes. "This is for Sophie," she said softly. He nodded. "Yeah, but it's also for him." The award ceremony was held that Saturday at 11 a.m. The courthouse lawn was packed with neighbors, city officials, and children holding hand-drawn signs that read things like, "Thank you, Bruno heroes don't need eyes, just heart, Sophie's guardian." Angela Reeves came too. She wore a navy blazer and carried a photo of her late husband, Captain David Reeves, pressed close to her chest. When she saw Bruno lying calmly beside Sophie's stroller, she knelt beside him, kissed his head, and whispered something only he could hear. Rachel watched the interaction with quiet respect. Some bonds never break. When Bruno was called to the front steps, the crowd erupted in applause. Rachel walked beside him, leash in hand with Sophie in her arms. Michael followed, hand on her back. The mayor gave a short speech, but no one really remembered what he said. What they remembered was this. Rachel knelt beside Bruno and whispered, "We're here because of you." Then she turned to the crowd and said, "Some people think animals are less than human. I think Bruno is more." The applause came like thunder, but Bruno didn't flinch. He just laid down quietly as if to say, "I was just doing my job." That evening, the Morgans sat on Martha's back deck with lemonade and leftovers from the ceremony. Sophie napped in the shade. Bruno rested at her side, his new custom collar glinting in the late sun. The brass plate read, "Heroes see with their hearts." Rachel traced the letters with her thumb. "Funny," she said. "We saved him from the shelter. But really, he saved us." Michael nodded, over and over again. Angela joined them, handing Rachel a small box. "I found this going through David's things," she said. "It belonged to Bruno. I think he'd want her to have it." Inside the box was a medal, burnished silver shaped like a badge with the words, "In service of those who cannot speak." Rachel's throat tightened. Angela looked down at Sophie, then at the dog sleeping beside her. "He kept his promise," she whispered. "David asked him to protect children, and he never stopped." Spring rolled into summer like it always did in Kentucky, warm, lush, and alive with cicadas and the smell of cut grass. But for the Morgans, that summer didn't feel like any other. They had returned to their home on Sycamore Avenue, rebuilt, restored, and finally safe. The walls had been opened, rewired, reinsulated, and resealed. The broken nursery had been moved to the other side of the house, bathed in morning light and filled with soft colors and laughter. And right next to the crib, in a specially designed orthopedic dog bed, rested Bruno. He was slower now, a little stiffer in the legs. He didn't climb stairs unless he had to, and he wore little booties to protect his still sensitive paws. But he was there, always there, ears tuned to every whimper Sophie made, every bottle opened, every lullaby sung. He didn't need to see. He knew. Rachel had started volunteering at the local animal rescue center, not just because she wanted to help, but because she needed to give back. People came in looking for perfect puppies. She told them about dogs like Bruno, dogs who had seen more than any human ever should, even without sight. Michael worked remotely now, building up his own consulting business in fire prevention and structural safety. Every home he stepped into, he checked for things most inspectors missed. He thought of Bruno every time he knelt beside a breaker box or ran a hand along an insulation panel. Sophie was growing fast. She had Rachel's smile, Michael's stubborn chin, and a laugh that could make even the worst days feel like sunshine. At 8 months old, she was crawling, babbling, and already trying to pull herself up on furniture. But what caught people's hearts was how she interacted with Bruno. Every morning, without fail, she'd crawl straight to his bed, tap his nose gently, giggle when his ears flicked. She'd rest her head against his side like he was a living pillow, and he never moved an inch. Rachel would watch from the doorway and whisper, "You were born to find each other." Angela Reeves continued visiting them once or twice a month. Sometimes she'd bring muffins or pictures of her late husband, Captain David Reeves. Sometimes she'd just sit beside Bruno and tell him stories only he would remember. One day she brought a manila envelope filled with neatly typed documents. "I talked to the Firefighter Memorial Association," she said, placing the envelope on the kitchen table. "They're adding a section for canine service animals next year. Bruno will be the first entry." Michael blinked. "Wait, the first ever?" Angela nodded. "They said his actions saved more lives than any other dog they've documented in state history. They're calling him a sentinel." Rachel teared up instantly. Bruno, for his part, yawned and rolled onto his side. Angela smiled. "He's too humble to care." But David would have been proud. By October, Sophie had taken her first steps. And on the same day, Bruno had what they all knew was his first real bad one. He didn't get up for breakfast, didn't follow Rachel into the nursery, didn't perk up at the sound of Sophie's voice. The vet came that afternoon, a mobile specialist who had followed Bruno's journey since the rescue. After a gentle exam, she sat with them on the porch, Bruno curled beside Rachel's feet. "He's not in pain," she reassured, "but his heart's slowing, his body's just winding down." Rachel stroked the soft fur on his neck. "How long?" "Could be days, could be weeks. Dogs like Bruno, they hang on longer than they should. They don't want to leave until they know we're okay." Michael swallowed hard. "Then we'll show him we are." That night, they all slept in the living room just like they had during the storm. Rachel on the couch, Michael in the recliner, Sophie in her portable crib, and Bruno lying quietly in the center of the room, his head lifted every time someone stirred, as if keeping watch. Because that's what he did. Bruno passed peacefully 2 weeks later. It was just before sunrise on a quiet Sunday morning. Rachel had gotten up to check on Sophie. Michael had just poured a cup of coffee, and Bruno, with one final exhale, rested his head on Rachel's slipper and let go. No pain, no fear, only peace. The ceremony at the park came a week later. The city had planted a tree in Bruno's honor. A dogwood, of course, like the ones that had bloomed when Sophie first came home. Beneath it, a small stone plaque read, "Bruno, hero, guardian, friend." He couldn't see, but he saw everything that mattered. Sophie toddled across the grass, placing a daisy at the base of the plaque. Rachel watched her daughter and smiled through tears. "I hope she remembers him," she whispered. Michael slipped his arm around her. "She will. We'll make sure of it." Over time, life found its rhythm again. Sophie turned 2, then 3. Rachel published a children's book titled The Dog Who Watched with His Heart. It was inspired by Bruno, of course, and told the story of a blind dog who saved a little girl from buzzing shadows and falling skies. It became a local bestseller. Schools asked her to read it during library week. Kids asked if the dog was real. Rachel always smiled and said, "Yes, and he was better than any story I could write." Today, the Morgans still live in the same house, stronger, safer, and filled with memories. They have a new dog, now a rescue mix, named Copper, who has none of Bruno's training and all of his heart. Sophie adores him, but sometimes she still points to the framed photo above the fireplace, the one of Bruno sitting proud beside her stroller, and says, "That's my Bruno." And Rachel always replies, "Yes, baby, that was your very first hero." Some people say dogs are just animals. But if you've ever looked into the eyes of one who stayed up all night watching your crib, or heard the bark that pulled you from a deadly sleep, or felt the warmth of a body pressed against your feet when your whole world was falling apart, then you know that dogs aren't just anything. They are everything. Bruno didn't need sight to protect. He didn't need words to love. And he didn't need medals to matter. He was proof that sometimes the most important things in life aren't seen at all, they're felt, known, trusted. Because heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just wear fur and carry the weight of our lives in their hearts. Thank you for joining us on this journey with Bruno, a dog who couldn't see but saw more than most of us ever will. What about you? Have you ever been saved or deeply touched by an animal in your life? Drop your story into the comments. We'd love to hear about your hero. And if Bruno's story moved you, please consider subscribing to Heroes for Animals, where we share real-life tales of courage, loyalty, and love, one paw print at a time.